You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. Today, as we draw near to the end of the year, we have a sort of news roundup for you inside the headlines, with some glad news for a change. We also have a conversation that is quite unique, very important, and I think delightful. My guest for today is Dr. Rachel Rubin, the distinguished urologist and sexual medicine expert, who's going to reveal more surprising and wonderful things than you ever imagined about, yes, the clitoris. Recently, Dr. Rubin's work was the subject of a PBS interview and also of a superb piece in the New York Times written by Rachel Gross, titled, "Half the World Has a Clitoris. Why Don't Doctors Study It?" Why don't they, indeed? Well, we'll learn some of the answers in our conversation. Then, of course, at the end of the program, there will be fighting words. But before we dive into any of that, we need to go inside the headlines. Here are some items in my catch-all end-of-the-year basket. The first is an alarming one, I'm afraid, but we do need to keep monitoring this. Hate speech on the rise on Twitter is unprecedented, according to researchers, since Elon Musk took over Twitter in October. Musk has described himself, of course, as a, quote, free speech absolutist, close quote, without apparently having the faintest grasp of what that means, or that the First Amendment applies to government censorship, not voluntary administering of public platforms, for which we used to have the now toothless Federal Communications Commission. The First Amendment was meant to protect us all from those who have power, King George III, for example, keep them from prescribing speech on political subjects. It was never intended by the framers as a free-for-all. They would be having multiple strokes. But a free-for-all for all the crazies it is now. Before Elon Musk bought Twitter, slurs against Black Americans showed up on the social media service an average of 1,282 times a day. After the billionaire became the owner of Twitter, they jumped to 3,876 a day. Slurs against gay men appeared on Twitter 2,506 times a day on average before Musk took over, but afterward the use rose to 3,964. And anti-Semitic posts referring to Jews or Judaism soared more than 61% in the 2 weeks after Musk acquired the site. These findings from the Center for Countering Digital Hate, the Anti-Defamation League, and other groups that study online platforms provide the most comprehensive picture to date of how conversations on Twitter have changed since Musk finalized his $44 billion deal to buy Twitter in late October, just a few minutes ago. While the numbers are relatively small, researchers say the increases are atypically high. They are so high in misogyny and harassment of women and girls that we have as yet no new workable numbers to describe them. So much for absolutism. We need Musk absolutely gone from Twitter. Now to the good news. 5 items in particular warranted my getting up and doing my little dance. First, Reverend Raphael Warnock won the senatorial runoff race in Georgia, dealing yet another blow to non-thinking, non-leaders who blindly follow Trump. Second, the Trump Organization itself was convicted of tax fraud perpetrated by 2 longtime executives. Well, it's a start. Third, Apple is moving out of China. A reckoning way overdue, and further evidence that Western companies are finally beginning to realize the peril of doing business in an authoritarian state. After China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, businesses flocked there. Its authoritarian nature was part of its appeal because of its efficiency. Low wages, weak labor unions, large manufacturing facilities that could be constructed very fast. All this worked together very smoothly, good for business. But the fallout has been considerable. People are not Bernie Sanders to the contrary, just economic animals. The loss of manufacturing jobs upended the lives of millions of people. It devastated communities. It helped destabilize the global system and the country itself, now evident in China's disastrous zero-COVID policy. Speaking of China, all across that ancient country, the unthinkable has been happening. People in streets, people refusing to obey police, people massing and marching and talking back. By the thousands, by the hundreds of thousands, people even attacking police. And with all its power and immense might, the government was forced to blink. The authorities have begun to loosen their zero-COVID policy of testing in more than a dozen cities across the country. The cabinet released a 10-point plan saying people with less severe infections could quarantine at home rather than in centralized facilities. This is unheard of for the Chinese government. Furthermore, put together with our last item in Inside the Headlines, it brings home to us all the basic lesson. When enough of us act, it matters. Because, of course, there's also Iran, the first contemporary women's revolution. Women-led, and mostly women-peopled, with men in support. More than 3 months of protests nationwide, with thousands of young women leading the demonstrations, set off by the death of a young woman being held by the so-called morality police for supposedly violating the country's super strict Islamic dress codes. The country has announced its first, as threatened, execution for protesting. A young man named Mohsen Shekari, who was hanged to death. But it's also come off a 3-day liberation strike from labor, because labor has joined with the students and the youth in protest. And now Iran has announced that it is abolishing the morality police. The decision is the government's first major concession to the protest movement. It, too, is unprecedented. But the demonstrators still want more. At least 400 people have been killed since the uprising began. 14,000 have been arrested, and it would seem there's no stopping these women. They are demanding regime change, and there are not enough police to arrest them. The morality police have scarcely been seen on the streets since the protests erupted, and women have been increasingly appearing in public without the hijab. One may well ask, why must it cost so much to win even inches? But that's the reality. More to the point, every demonstration, every individual standing up and saying no, every vote where you can vote, every refusal to stay silent matters. It matters. It makes a difference. It really matters. We have to take a short break here, but I will be back directly for the conversation this week with Dr. Rachel Rubin. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live Like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live and visit us at WMClive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
My guest for this week's conversation is Dr. Rachel S. Rubin. She is a board-certified urologist and a sexual medicine specialist. She's one of only a handful of physicians with fellowship training in sexual medicine for all genders. Dr. Rubin is a clinician, researcher, and impassioned educator. In addition to being education chair for the International Society for the Study of Women's Sexual Health, she serves as associate editor for the journal Sexual Medicine Reviews. Dr. Rubin completed her medical education at Tufts University, her urology training at Georgetown University, and her sexual medicine fellowship training with Dr. Irwin Goldstein in San Diego. I should also say that the reaction to the recent piece on her in the New York Times was so overwhelming, both to Dr. Rubin and to the Times itself, that they're still digging out of the mail and messages and general hallelujahs, otherwise known as reactions from readers saying, well, it's damned well about time. Here is Dr. Rachel Rubin. Welcome, Dr. Rubin. Welcome to Women's Media Center Live.
Oh, I'm so thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, you are a very busy woman, and that's very encouraging to me, actually, because it means some attention is being paid to the clitoris, which is not always been the case, as we know all too well. Since you are an expert in sexual medicine, as well as a urologist and all sorts of other interesting good things, I think we know the reason why, but tell us why the clitoris is so still neglected in medical science and in the general knowledge of many physicians. Tell us why.
Well, there are so many reasons for that. And historically, I'm not going to get into all the history behind it, although it is a fascinating history where the clitoris is often discovered and then forgotten and then rediscovered. And then as male anatomists love to name themselves after things, given crazy names and things like that. And so, it actually goes down to the idea that the nerve to the genitals, all genitals, really, it's called the pudendal nerve, which means shame in Latin, right? Shame. Yeah. And so these have been shameful parts since the dawn of time. And when you shame parts, you certainly don't study them. And when you don't think that they're important for reproduction or life or curing cancer and things like that, they really don't get much attention. And so we know that the clitoris and the penis are exactly the same thing. They come from the same embryology. They're made up of the same tissue, but women neither penetrate with or pee through their clitorises. So science has kind of forgotten about them and doesn't really care. And so our anatomy textbooks, it always has the baseline as the male, and then the female anatomy is kind of an afterthought. Yeah. And so it's been pretty ignored over the decades. And so all that we are doing now is saying, wait a minute, quality of life matters. It's actually quite important. And I would argue that my knowledge as a urologist has helped me tremendously because we very much give a crap about men's sexual health and quality of life. And I'm not here to say we shouldn't. We absolutely should. But we can give that same amount of excitement, research, and advocacy surrounding women's sexual health. And so it's really fun taking what I know about men's sexual health and just translating it into the female anatomy. And so many people are learning, are excited, and there's so much more work that we have to do.
Hear, hear. Bravo. Tell me something. Do you think, because it has been posited by feminists, certainly, and by some scientists, that one reason that the clitoris has been, to put it benignly, overlooked, to put it malevolently, deliberately ignored, or bad metaphor, wiped off the face of the earth, is because it is the one or sole organ in the human body, either male or female, that has no function other than sexual pleasure.
I would bet that
It's separated from reproduction.
Question.
It's separated from
So
reproduction.
I think there are some interesting theories out there about how it actually does aid in reproduction. I think it makes sense from a very basic level. If women like sex and they feel pleasure, they're going to want to have more of it, in which case it's good for reproduction, right? If it felt like doing a chore, you may not want to do it, in which case we won't have and we won't make more babies and reproduce, which is actually happening in 2022. We're in a sex recession, and it's partially because people aren't having as much bad sex, and so there's not as much sex happening because women are actually demanding good sex, and so when they find bad sex, they're not doing it as much. And there's many reasons why people aren't having as much sex anymore. But I think, yes, the clitoris is historically been thought of as useless other than for pleasure. But I think if we actually studied it, I think, and people have been studying it, there are some very interesting theories about maybe it's not so useless after all. And the answer is who knows? But if we don't study it, we'll never find out.
Besides, pleasure is useful.
Pleasure is in itself a muscle relaxation, a quality of life, joy, intimacy. There's nothing useless about that, in my opinion.
Right. Well, you say that they are basically the same, the penis and the clitoris. Describe for the layperson, and because this is only vocal, it's a little difficult. But the glands and the shaft and the hood and the horrors of what is called FGM. Female genital mutilation, which I would say also extend to male circumcision. Maybe you could describe some of that so that, in the positive sense, so that people could realize what a horror it is to do away with it.
Well, so, there are many nerves that go to the genitals, and the genitals are important for arousal, for orgasm, for, sexual pleasure. And so there are many different ways that you can harm genital anatomy. And I won't speak, too much about all the specifics. There are people who are getting labiaplasties and clitoral hood reductions by choice. It's actually quite a common practice in the United States. We know that there are religious practices out there. There are many things that people do to the genitals on behalf of politics and religion, and also just genital aesthetics, and like having a breast implant or a nose change. People want their labia changed. So, but
the women's movement has been pretty good about pointing out that that FGM is not just something done over there in some other place, but that we have our own versions of it here, just those like those you've just mentioned.
And so the key is understanding that in our job, and kind of what the New York Times had focused on, was the idea that education is the most important thing. If you don't understand the body, then you won't understand how certain things, surgical procedures, benign. I had a woman who put a benign feeling cream on her vulva and ended up having chronic, unbelievable lack of sensation to her genitals. So if we don't understand the anatomy, the physiology, the nerve, how the nerves work through the tissue, then we can't understand the harms that could be caused. And so everything in medicine, we will always cause harm in medicine. It is inevitable, right? We will always cause harm in medicine. And so my job as a surgeon is to try to do no harm, and also to do what's called informed consent. And what's happening is that people are not getting informed consent because even our anatomy textbooks aren't correct. So how can we give you true informed consent when we haven't studied the issue in the first place? And then what happens is people come in and say, wow, I was harmed during surgery. And then the person says, well, that's impossible. I've never seen this before, or this isn't real. And then they get told it's all in their heads and that they're crazy. And then you get hysteria and gaslighting. And this is where the problem is that we deal with.
So how do we get this taught in medical schools as a regular pro forma norm and in medical textbooks, so that the ignorance stops there and then it begins to filter out to the general public more?
Well, I will say after that article, we have a lot of work to do. We have to change textbooks. We have to change medical curriculum. But we have to also understand that, this is one part of a many, there's huge problems, right? Women are not represented in clinical trials in the same way that men. They didn't even have to be in clinical trials up until the 90s. We treat women as though everything with women's health should be treated by an OBGYN, and then we get angry that our OBGYN doesn't have all the answers. Well, did you know an OBGYN had a year less training than a urologist and is responsible about 1 million times more things and scarier things than a urologist is responsible for? And I can say that because I am a urologist.
My God.
And, it's a horrifying, right? And so there is no doctor for men that is supposed to be in charge of every aspect of a man's life. That doesn't make any sense. And yet we expect our gynecologist to be everything and in one 10-minute visit once a year. So we have to change all of it at every level. And so we need everyone to understand that they are a women's health doctor, not just a gynecologist, that every orthopedic surgeon is a women's health doctor, that every neurologist, that every psychiatrist, right? They are all women's health doctors because we are 50% of the population. And so that's why it's so, the job is enormous. And yes, it starts, sexual pleasure is important. I joke all the time. We know that the pay gap exists, right? Women are paid less than men. And yet the orgasm gap exists as well, right? Women orgasm less than men. And so I always say, if we can fix we'll fix the pay gap if we can fix the orgasm gap. If women can care about their orgasms as much as men do, then we can all have equality. I think that's the key to equality, perhaps.
Well, this is wonderful. How do we just get you as the physician for everybody? You're already overworked as it is.
I am already overworked and drowning. So if you know anyone who wants to come work with me, please pass them along. But we have to train people. We have to train a generation to give a crap about these things, to ask the questions. And I think the system is failing everybody because the way that insurance companies have it running is that you get a 10-minute visit once a year, and that is not enough time to really understand your sexual health and quality of life. And so it's very complex.
And I've been told by certain medical professionals, not recently, and not because they would have been flattened, but that women are really just smaller men. It's extraordinary because every cell in the body is sexed. And so it's a very different cup of tea that we're dealing with here. And the more we learn about one, the more we learn about the other. It isn't anti-men. It's just more expanding of knowledge. And it seems to me so bizarre that reproduction has taken it doesn't if you're looking at it from a patriarchal point of view, of course, that reproduction, the product that women produce, is of the only value. And if it's not directly connected with reproduction, or if it can't be proven, or if it is still an ancillary effect, like, say, pleasure, there's something wrong with it. There's something shameful. There's something sinful. There's something at least to be ignored. I come from a generation when in the 70s we began exploring this, and there was the myth of the vaginal orgasm, a well-known piece written by one young radical feminist, and there were all of these pieces where Mary Jane Sherfy's book, where we never heard of the, we thought all orgasms were vaginal. We never heard of the multiple orgasm. First time I heard of the multiple orgasm, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. So the ignorance is still profound, and it's been a couple generations already now. Has there been any or much or detectable movement toward progress?
I will say that there is, 10 steps forward, 5 steps back. There are moments and flickers of hope and excitement and wonder. That New York Times article that came out went like wildfire. It got pushed. More than 2 million people read it. It sparked fuel. I don't know what it was about the article that made everybody so empowered and excited. There is a tone that has changed. I think social media has changed the conversation quite a bit. It's a challenge. I think the Me Too movement has helped and hurt in many ways. It's both helpful and hurtful because doctors now don't want to ask about it. They don't want to do exams. They don't want to look at people because they're afraid, they're afraid of being inappropriate or uncomfortable. And so actually it's going to hurt research because people, no one's going to go into resource of sexual health, as because it can be very perverse and inappropriate, and of course it shouldn't be, and it doesn't have to be. And there are bad players in all aspects of medicine. And so there are glimmers of hope, and there is a generation of people who is trying really hard to educate and change these conversations. But yes, it starts when you distill down what I love so much about my job, and I love my job so much, is because I opened my own practice about 10 months ago, and I treat, Washington, D.C., the smartest, the most brilliant, the most educated, with the most fascinating, incredible jobs. And they, men and women, all genders, they come to see me. And if you distill down, what I love about it is that I just explain to them the basic facts of how their bodies work, the physiology, the biology, and then we talk about how to make it work better or more useful or more pleasurable or more fun, because quality of life is important and it matters to people. And they don't know any of it. It is all brand new, whether it's this is your clitoral anatomy, or this is how your penis works, or this is why you have pain with penetration, or why you're breastfeeding, or your menopause, or your diabetes or high blood pressure are affecting your sexual health, and here's what we can do about it. It is so fun because I empower people to understand, and you can't do that in 10 minutes. If you do that in 10 minutes, like, you can't even say hello in 10. I do long hellos, so you can't even say hello in 10 minutes.
I bet I bet they're so hungry for this knowledge too.
Oh my gosh, they're so hungry, and that's why I can't stop talking. I mean, you see me at a cocktail party, and I will cross the room if I see someone having a hot flash, and I say, "Please, you don't have to suffer." And so I never stop talking about what I do, because people are so hungry for the information, and it's not me pushing my agenda of me, it's pushing the agenda of, can I please teach you about your body and how it works, so you don't have to suffer. And I think too often women are told, just suck it up. This is the way life is. You have to deal with urinary tract infections. You have to deal with pelvic pain. You have to deal with low libido. And it is not all psychosocial. Psychosocial stuff is so important. Mental health is so important. And having good relationships and good sex is really important. But there is also a lot of biology that goes with it. And when people understand the biology, then they can understand that there are things that we can do to help.
Where do you recommend people go for that information? I mean, if their own doctors are not supplying it. I mean, is there an organization? Is there SICUS? It comes to mind, but that's,
Yes, there's so many. There are lots of resources out there. First of all, everyone should follow me on social media. I'm at Dr. Rachel Rubin, DrRachelRubin. That's on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Obviously LinkedIn and things like that. But really, I am the education chair of a wonderful organization called ISSWISH, the International Society for the Study of Women's Sexual Health, ISSWSH. You can find a provider at isswsh.org. These are people, this is specifically for women's sexual health. These are people who are trained, who've done courses, who really care about this stuff. We just got done with a course that's been going on for 16 years, and this is the first year it was sold out. This is our fall course where we teach clinicians about how to practice sexual medicine. And as education chair, I got to run the course, and it was sold out for the first time this year. So for hope, people are listening. They're excited. They're wanting to learn more. So there is a little bit of hope, and that's what we found. And they were so hungry for more information. So it is very, very exciting.
Oh, this is extremely exciting. Yeah. Say once more how they can reach you. You'll be inundated, but you just take your time in answering them.
Oh, no problem. Please follow us on social media, or you could go on my website, rachelrubinmd.com. On social media, I'm at Dr. Rachel Rubin. And then please, if you want to find a provider of like-minded people who do this kind of work, it's isswsh.org. It's a wonderful multidisciplinary organization. If you are a clinician, a researcher, a patient advocate, you are welcome in this organization, and you will absolutely love it. We have an upcoming annual meeting in St. Louis this year, and it's really going to be a wonderful meeting. So come hang out and meet us. We need your help. We need warriors. We need people on the front lines. We need to build an army of people who care about this work. It cannot just be a handful of us, because there's this gosh, everyone in the population is affected by sexual health and quality of life. And so if we don't talk about it, we ignore the fact that this is affecting so many people.
It's absolutely central, and it is distorted in so many different ways, from the subtle to the horrific. abroad, at home, in the quiet interstices of, shuttered houses. It is just little atrocities are going on, and it's all due to ignorance and people being afraid to stand up for what they don't even know yet exists. So this is quite wonderful. You are wonderful. And I'm so grateful to you for the work that you do and the way that you do it and the enthusiasm with which you do it as well. So thank you, Dr. Rachel Rubin, for everything that you do, and keep doing it, because it's just great work.
Thank you for having me. I very much appreciate it.
We have to take one final break here, and then I will be back with some fighting words. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Women's sexual pleasure. Why are those fighting words? Beginning, as I usually do, with etymology, I can tell you that the word clitoris is from the ancient Greek word chi, or alternatively, the Greek words for little hill, or to shut or latch, hook, or possibly even a verb meaning to touch lightly or lasciviously. Of course, it's also been called everything imaginable, from the pinnacle of heaven to the seat of Satan. And, revealingly, the pudenda, often used to name the entire genital area, is from the Latin pudenda, which meant wrongful, to feel shame. It came into usage toward the late 17th century, but obviously the Romans had used it much earlier, and all its variants since then reflect that basic definition. It shames. How did we get here? How did we fall from lasciviousness and chi into shame? How did the parts of the body most pleasurable come to be so identified with disgust and fear and shame? Well, it would indeed take forever, or at least far too long, to list all the twists and turns inherent in the patriarchal definition of penetrative phallic sexuality, much less the history of the clitoris. But we can note in passing all the male experts and medical geniuses from the ancient Greeks and Romans through Galen and Vesalius, Hippocrates and Albertus Magnus, Avicenna and Freud, all up to today, who in their times discovered the clitoris, falling on a platitude with an air of enormous discovery, and then undiscovered it, and discovered it all over again a century or so later, or decided that they had invented the clitoris, or announced that the clitoris was a precursor or as yet undeveloped stunted penis, or else a late-blooming shrunken afterthought of the penis, or who named the clitoris after themselves, or who proclaimed the clitoris really did not exist, or that it had only a urinary function, or had only a reproductive function, or had neither function, or had no function whatsoever, or neglected it entirely, or ignored it utterly, or decided that mutilating it would be a good idea. You can get some idea of the general tone, however, from Vesalius, who stated in the 16th century that, quote, It is unreasonable to blame others for incompetence on the basis of some sport of nature you have observed in some women, and you can hardly ascribe this new and useless part, as if it were an organ, to healthy women. Period. Close quote. Deplorably, all of the above and more, many more, were considered historically valid responses over time. In humans, ostriches, and a limited number of other animals, the visible portion, the glans, is the front junction in the labia minora, or inner lips. While few animals urinate through the clitoris or use it reproductively, the spotted hyena, which has an especially large clitoris, urinates, mates, and gives birth via the organ. Look up the spotted hyena when you have a minute. It's fascinating. They're very alpha, the females. Anyway, unlike the male penis, which is the male equivalent to the clitoris does not contain the opening of the urethra and is not used for urination. In most species, the clitoris lacks any reproductive function and exists solely for pure pleasure. It is the human female's most sensitive erogenous zone, developing from an outgrowth in the embryo called the genital tubercle, Tubercle. Initially undifferentiated, the tubercle develops into either a penis or a clitoris during the development of the reproductive system, depending on exposure to androgens or male hormones. Everything starts out female. The clitoris is a complex structure with the glans, the head, roughly the size and shape of a pea, estimated to have 8,000 to 10,000 sensory nerve endings, twice as many as the nerve endings found in the human penis, and more than any other part of the human body. But then we get into culture and cultural perceptions of the organ. Oh, dear me. Some are hilarious, some vicious, some disgusted and disgusting, most profoundly ignorant. Here we find Freud doing his Freud thing. In 1905, he published his theory about the immaturity of clitoral orgasms, which negatively affected women's sexuality for much of the 20th century. Thanks a lot, Sigmund. We had Masters and Johnson in 1966, but very muddled. We had Cher Haidt in the Haidt Report, and especially the work of the feminist women's health centers, which propelled feminist reformation of anatomical texts, because medical schools didn't. But these didn't have a general impact. Nevertheless, in 2013, a humanitarian group named Clitoraid launched the first annual International Clitoris Awareness Week in May, and young girls, bless them, protested for clitoris awareness at a women's rights rally in Paris in 2019. Still, willful ignorance persists in the 21st century. In 2019, a questionnaire was administered to a sample of educational sciences postgraduate students concerning the organs of female and male reproductive systems. The researchers reported that about 2/3 of the students failed to name any external female genitals, such as the clitoris and labia, even after detailed pictures had been provided to them. A 2022 analysis reported that the clitoris is mentioned in only 1 out of 113 Greek secondary education textbooks used in biology classes from the 1870s straight up to the present. Shirley Ogletree and Harvey Ginsberg concluded that there's a general neglect of the word itself in common vernacular. They looked at the terms used to describe genitalia in a database from 1887 to 2000 and found that penis was used in 1,482 sources, but vagina only in 409, and clitoris in 83. The same with terminology used by college students regarding beliefs about sexuality. The students having been overwhelmingly educated to believe that the vagina is the female counterpart of the penis and not the clitoris. Furthermore, social stigmas still exist. That, for example, the clitoris and female genitalia in general are visually unappealing, when, au contraire, we all can recognize the accuracy of Sylvia Plath's description of the male genitalia as looking like a strangled turkey neck. Ignorance and aversion appear to be largely cross-cultural, although not exclusively so, which is not even to get into the hideously creative various ways in which human beings, for cultural, traditional, or religious excuses, have engaged in piercing, cutting, scraping, burning away, razoring, slicing, sewing, completely excising, and otherwise mutilating of the female genitalia. Non-medical male circumcision, often performed even in the so-called developed world, strikes me also as similar savagery, leaving aside that this is carried out in more sterile and, quote, civilized, unquote, circumstances. Removal of the clitoris and the labia, however, often done in unsterile circumstances in the global south, causes girls deaths, and if they do survive, creates lifetimes of suffering as grown women, including fistulas, dangerous or fatal pregnancy and labor, a lack of sexual sensation, multiple urinary tract infections, sterility, etc., etc. The excision of these parts, which are viewed by some as the male parts of a woman's body, is believed to enhance a girl's femininity, and is thought synonymous with docility and obedience. Overall, the practice of female genital mutilation has been declining over the past 3 decades. In the 31 countries with nationally representative prevalence data, around 1 in 3 girls aged 15 to 19 today have undergone the practice, versus 1 in 2 in the 1990s. But not all countries have made progress, and the pace of decline is uneven. Fast decline among girls aged 15 to 19 has occurred across countries with varying levels of FGM prevalence, including Burkina Faso, Egypt, Kenya, Liberia, and Togo. But the pace of decline has been uneven. In Somalia, 98% of girls have been cut. It is estimated that more than 2 million female genital mutilation procedures are performed each year, most before the girl child is age 5. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on, for now, Twitter, and remember to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag Fighting Words. And that's our show for this week. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and now Instagram at The Robin Morgan, and you can check out my blog at robinmorgan.net and find my latest book of poems, Dark Matter, and my brand new novel, Parallax, wherever books are sold. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the Women's Media Center. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer as well as founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer of this program, Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us again next time on Women's Media Center Live.